Welcome to the
Club Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
The guys are ready, so let's hand over to Rob Rose, JB, PB and Aldrin, and get on with the show.
Hi, gents.
Hey, Rob.
We're all back together, and just like it was for Tuesday's show, we have a trio talking you through the NFL action. And rather than look back at the week just gone, regular listeners will know this is the show where we look ahead to what might be. And this time last week, I was talking about the fact that in an unpredictable season, it was broadly a pretty predictable slate of games. Now, obviously, the Detroit Lions threw a kind of sporting hand grenade in the middle of that. But if I thought it looked pretty predictable last week, I think it looks anything but predictable, with probably 3/4 of the games in the slate being a real coin flip for me. So I can't wait to get your thoughts, your picks, and find out which teams we're pulling back that velvet rope for and letting them move on into Club Dub. So as there's only 3 of us, that means 3 games to pick. And Aldrin, as is just tradition, I'm going to throw over to you for the first of our ties for our Pick'em show this week. What do you think is the game that stands out to you most?
Thanks. Yeah, my game of the week is, I guess, a team I feel like we've talked about a lot, but I guess purely this year because they seem to pose the most intrigue and warrant discussion the most. And it's the Chiefs against the Raiders that I've gone for this week. And I don't know how I feel about the Chiefs. And it feels like we've talked about them at great length the last 5 or 6 weeks as not living up to their potential, not being as good as we've seen in previous years. And yet each week we seem to move on and they're still in the hunt. They're still top of the division. They're on a pretty strong win streak. We've talked about how Kelsey hasn't maybe lived up to his stellar potential, yet he still leads all tight ends in receptions, yards, touchdowns, yards after the catch. So I do feel maybe we do them a bit of a disservice, and maybe they are the team that doesn't have to be as special as they have been in October and November, but making it to January is the bit that counts, and ultimately they feel like they're maybe on their road to doing that. And then on the flip side, the Raiders, I guess, have overcome a heck of a lot of adversity this year with a lot of turmoil and change within the organization. Yet, again, Derek Carr seems to be the guy that everybody likes to dismiss and isn't the superstar quarterback yet, probably is in the midst of his best season as a pro, really organizing a pretty efficient offense, albeit maybe struggling a little bit without Darren Waller when he's been out injured the last couple of weeks. But again, really competitive, really difficult to say that they're out of the hunt and they're not a top team. So this is the game of the week for me because I feel like, as is customary, on any given Sunday, you can get any version of either of those teams and it could be an absolutely stellar matchup.
So my point, I want to chip in. Let's go Raiders for me first. The point you make is right. They are so much better than they deserve to be. I think I was pretty down on the Raiders at the start of the season before the turmoil you describe. I mean, they ended last season horribly, literally fell apart down the stretch. There was nothing really that suggested they were going to move on. They were going to be particularly good. I mean, I spent the off-season saying if you're old, past your best and looking for a lot of money, you probably end up playing for the Raiders, right? And add in the adversity they've had, and I think you're spot on. There are a number of players who are having their best year. I think importantly, the quarterback is one of them. I think Carr absolutely is one of them. For as much as I don't think the running backs have maybe had the type of year the organization was hoping for. Well, actually, Derek Carr's performance kind of levels that out a bit anyway. It kind of creates a slightly more balanced attack. And yeah, I think there are big decisions for ultimately the Davis family to make at the end of the year about what they do with head coaches? Do they stick with the coaching staff in situ ultimately, who I think have done some really good things? But wouldn't it be nice for a new fan base in Las Vegas, and to be fair, the existing fan base in Oakland who've remained very loyal, for them to have an element of feel-good in what has been anything but a feel-good year for the franchise? I mean, we've had these fairy tale stories before. I mean, the Raiders story has not had any element of fairy tale thus far. It would be a proper Phoenix from the Flames type affair. But yeah, I think you're right about these teams. Both have the ability to beat anybody. And you know what? Your point about the Chiefs, for me to keep this brief, the Kelsey point I'll take. I think, you know, and we talked about this off pod earlier in the week, he's not quite at the production levels of previous seasons. You know, his yards per catch, you know, there's a few things that are down. But I mean, actually for me, Tyreek Hill is probably the bigger disappointment, not so much that it shows in his stats, but the number of times that balls are just bouncing off his hands. You know, the more and more teams that seem to be able to keep him bottled up for more and more of games. But you know what? In spite of all of that, I think with them righting the defense in recent weeks, that is probably a bigger thing for them. If they can keep that defense performing at a reasonable level, they have got a very high ceiling again. You know, I wouldn't put it past them making the Super Bowl. But yeah, Tyreek Hill maybe is where my spotlight shines if we're believing Kelsey is still in pretty good shape.
You shared those kind of stats with us, was it over the weekend about Kelsey? And it's not surprising, but at the same time, it is surprising. I think it's just because visually this season, it's been very hard to keep track of who is actually playing at a superstar level. And the thing that I think epitomized that for me was watching that, I think it was the first George Kittle touchdown for the 49ers at the weekend.
Yeah, that's
just
great.
The incredible body control to keep his feet in bounds, and then the speed that he had to just, okay, I'm off. And we haven't seen, or I can't think of an occasion where we have seen that level of elite play, that elite standout play from Kelsey. So I think it is very much he's getting the job done when is needed. It's not as flashy potentially as we've expected it to be. And not as flashy as we've expected it to be kind of epitomizes the Chiefs season. Like we keep coming back to the fact that the Chiefs have underperformed in regards to how well people thought they were going to be. They're still 8-4. They're still like the same as the Ravens and the same as the Titans, and they're a game behind the Patriots. But I think the only reason for that is because I don't think the Patriots have had their bye week yet, have they? They're on bye this week. Yeah. So taking all of that into account, Chiefs are actually doing pretty well, just as well as any of the other big AFC teams. But because it hasn't been that flashy, incredible style that we expect from them, I think it is. You started this off by talking about it. You know, as a podcast, we have often talked about, you know, are the Chiefs good yet? What's wrong with the Chiefs? And maybe it's just that, well, maybe nothing's wrong with the Chiefs on offense. Maybe they're just workmen. Maybe it's literally just we're going to grind a game out and we'll win 21-18 instead of we're going to win every game and score 35 to 40 points at the very least in everything we do. I still think there's issues with that defense. I still don't think it's as solid as it could be, but that's the Chiefs defense for the last 3 or 4 years. And on any other occasion and against any previous version of the Raiders, I would think that would be something that could be exploited. This version of the Raiders are missing some of that kind of explosion themselves. Like I remarked to Rob when they were kind of trying to charge down the field for the win on Sunday. And so it'd be really good if the Raiders had like an elite speed wide receiver with really, really good hands. And we're not going to talk about the reasons, obviously, why the Raiders don't have something like that. But that's playmakers is what they need, and playmakers is kind of what they're lacking without kind of Darren Waller and Josh Jacobs and that.
Yeah, I mean,
Jackson's
Josh Jacobs
been
been
alright, hasn't he?
injured. Yeah, this is it. I mean, I think they're just better than they deserve to be, though, aren't they? I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not in that mold of being a Super Bowl team because they are short some top tier talent, but they're there or thereabout. I mean, I had them. I mean, where are we at this point in the season? What would be a feasible record if they were a 3-win team at this point in the season? You know, if they were a 3-7, 3-8, wherever we are, team, I wouldn't have been shocked by that. I think they've massively overperformed, but I think you're right. I think we're judging them by two. We're looking at these teams through different lenses, aren't we? I think.
Yeah.
You know, the Chiefs have what the Raiders don't, yet the records don't necessarily show a great deal of difference because in reality, there isn't a great deal of difference. You know, it's
just,
a weird one.
You think about the games that teams have won and lost, and you think about how the Raiders started with that great win against the Ravens on Monday Night Football for week 1. And you kind of look at the season that the Ravens have gone on to have and the seasons that the Raiders have gone on to have. And kind of if you went back to someone and said, right, at week 13, one of these teams is going to be 8-4 and one of these teams is going to be 6-6, which do you think it is? A predominant part of that audience that you'd ask the question to would think the Raiders would be 8-4. Yes, there's been an awful lot outside of the game that has inflicted issues on them, but ultimately they're still, much like a lot of teams, they're a very, very inconsistent team. That's the word. But you still have to, I think, have a bit of faith in them because it takes a lot to beat the Ravens, you know. And I think if a team can really get in there with them and grind out a victory, you're really doing something special.
The Steelers plug is unnecessary. The Steelers are.
I mean, who mentioned? I didn't mention the Steelers. I just said I said if you beat the Ravens, you're obviously a really, really good team. I mean, you've brought their name into it, Rob. And I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm just saying that's not what I said.
I'm just putting this out there. The reason the Steelers beat the Ravens is in part because Mark Andrews can't catch. Now, when you're professionally paid to catch, that's problematic. And I mean, maybe a narrow sample size. Look, I think the Raiders Chiefs is a great game. I think the Chiefs can't be ignored because, as you put it, Aldrin, and you mentioned it, JB, after a bad start, they are rolling. They're not rolling the way we used to. But you know what? I'll tell you who else needs credit. Steve Spagnuolo. I mean, Spags has solved problem. I mean, there were glaring holes in that defense. Safety, not being able to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks, not turning over the football. I mean, they've not done a huge amount of probably the third. But I tell you what, they are being coached up and they are improving. And to your point, Aldrin, do I think Steve Spagnuolo can have a defense that, you know, once we get to January is competitive and keeping them in games? You know, why not? Why not? I mean, who is really there to blow them out of the water? I mean, even if the Patriots are the class of the AFC at the moment, they're not a point-scoring juggernaut class of the AFC. You know, you can imagine a game where, you know, you might need to score 20, 24 points to beat the Patriots, something of that order. I think it's a fascinating one. I think there's arguments either way. I think the Raiders just want to be careful they don't miss out. And I think if they take care of business against the opponents they have that are, you know, a lesser caliber than the Chiefs, they'll be fine. But equally, coin flip game for me. So, Aldrin, it's down to you. One team, like we say, gets the velvet rope pulled back and they get to strut on into Club Dub. Who's it going to be and why, sir?
Well, I think it could be a real back and forth game, but I do feel like the Chiefs are a little bit on the up, and I think they'll be sneaking past the velvet rope into Club Dub this week.
Who doesn't love that music? The best piece of music in global podcasting, I've no doubt. And our first team into Club Dub is the Kansas City Chiefs. Good for them. It's a sign of the times, right? So with one team on a roll in Club Dub, you've picked the Chiefs Raiders as game of the week. Strong. It's not the one I'd have picked. I think there's an absolute gem in the slate this week. But JB, what have you got up your sleeve? Looking ahead to these games, which is the barnstormer for you?
Well, this week, Club Dub, I think, is having a theme night, but rather than 80s or 90s, I think this week's theme is Best in the West, because while Aldrin has gone AFC West, I've gone NFC West, and we're going to have a little talk about the Los Angeles Rams visiting the Arizona Cardinals, for the fact that it presents an awful lot of really interesting storyline potential. It's got a really good amount of discussion points and a lot of really good potential for really good football. The Cardinals can clinch a playoff berth with a win, which is a really important thing. We've got 3 teams that can clinch some form of playoff thing this week. We won't talk about the other 2 just yet. And I think you have to keep that in mind. Like, we're looking at the Cardinals sewing up late January football this weekend if they can get past the Rams, who will also be kind of looking at this as the opportunity to get back to being able to guarantee mid to late January football for themselves as well. We've talked a little bit in the last couple of weeks about how the Cardinals have performed kind of piloted by Colt McCoy, without Kyler Murray, without DeAndre Hopkins, and the past weekend kind of just showed, yes, the Cardinals without them can be fine and can win games. The Cardinals with them are probably in the conversation for best teams in the league. That we talked about it on Sunday because we had the benefit of the Cardinals being the early game rather than the late window. And Kyler didn't really have to do a lot. He didn't throw the ball a lot. He didn't have fantastic yards or anything like that, but still managed to have, was it 4 total touchdowns, 2 in the air and 2 on the ground? And that's what you get with a guy like that. And it's the kind of person, the kind of player that you would look and think that Sean McVay on the opposing sideline would be like, I'm happy with Matt Stafford. He's a definite upgrade on what we had previously. But if I had someone like that, we could do marvelous things. And just to kind of focus on the Cardinals as well, the defense looks incredible. I think they're getting solid contributions from everyone, not just Chandler Jones. You've got Marcus Golden. You've got Zach Allen had a really good game. You've got so much depth with guys like Jordan Hicks. And they're a beast. They're going to be a beast to take on, and they're the kind of team that you really don't want to have to face at any point in the season. The Rams, meanwhile, to me, are again a little bit like the Chiefs. I think we're judging them maybe on different scales. We're looking at them through different viewpoints, and to a degree, the Rams have been a bit of a disappointment because you look and think, well, they could have done and should have done so much more. They should be so much further ahead. But again, we're talking about a Rams team that's 8-4. And we've just talked about the fact that that's matching 3 division leaders in the AFC. So I think part of the reason that we could look at the Rams and say, oh, the Rams are a bit of a disappointment is because they've got the 10-2 Cardinals ahead of them. So you kind of got to think, well, can you say the Rams are one of the best teams in the league when they're not even the top team in their own division?
Margins are fine though, aren't they? I mean, the only thing about this 8-4, and it's come up twice in a row because obviously we're talking about it with the Chiefs. Here's what I'd put to you. If you offered at the start of the season every head coach in the NFL an 8-4 record through 12 games, do you know how many coaches would bite your arm off? All 32 of them. Every single one of them, right? Because from 8-4, you've got not only destiny in your own hands, but you are pretty much guaranteed playoff football. I mean, you've got to look at both sides to see whether it's AFC or NFC. There are teams at pretty much 500 or slightly worse who are absolutely considering themselves still in the hunt. Matthew Stafford has been erratic, but Cooper Kupp has been epic. I think the Rams miss that run, that special running back, that kind of girly type running back who you felt had big playability. But actually come January, a bit like the Chiefs, I don't think there's anyone necessarily better than the Rams. The Cardinals, do you know what? There's 2 things about the Cardinals. I think they could come back next season even better because a lot of their contributions, you mentioned defense and the big names like Chandler Jones and JJ Watt, I suppose, But you look at Byron Murphy Jr., you look at Isaiah Simmons, a number of their key pieces on defense are young pieces. And the only thing that really makes me nervous about predicting, a few really competitive years from Arizona is just how many players they have out of contract at the end of the year. I mean, that is a terrifying number of potential free agents. But anyway, coming back to this year, I think you've got two teams who ultimately have big playability, and it will come down to whoever on the day makes bigger plays. Cardinals have been better on the road. And as much as we, said the Bears were dreadful and, ultimately the Bears tie at the weekend was a banana skin for the Cardinals of sorts, it was also a real test of where they are. Really bad weather conditions. This is a fair weather team, right, in the Cardinals, down in the desert state of Arizona. And they played in the wind and the rain, with a slippery football, slippery underfoot, so many things against them. And they were never in doubt, really, were they? Once they were ahead and they could establish the run, it was one of those weird times where as a Cardinals fan, you felt pretty calm watching them, because even if the Bears scored, and the Bears did get a few points. I mean, what did they end up with? 20 some odd points in the end. I mean, it wasn't, as convincing a scoreline as it could have been. But you know what? Every time the Cardinals got the ball back, you felt they had the ability to put a drive together that would give them at least three. And yeah, I think that's a sign that the Cardinals are a capable team. But yeah, I don't think you can be too down on the Rams. I mean, if the Rams win this weekend, they're a game out on the Cardinals, and the Cardinals still have the Cowboys, I think, in their schedule, a couple of other big games. I think we're looking at two very good teams, and pretty much any team in the league that's 8-4, I'd put in that category now as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think both very good teams. I guess the only caveat is that the Rams seem to have done really well against poor teams and have struggled against the better teams. Whereas I feel like the Cardinals have been fairly consistent against good opposition and pretty much all comers. But equally, I think you look at the Rams defense, you still think that's got the potential to stop anybody on their day if they get going. Like you say, the record's still good. Stafford, while erratic, I think you lose Robert Woods, and I think it took Stafford a couple of weeks to get that rapport with Woods as well to start the season. So you probably only had 3 or 4 games really where they had a solid connection until Woods went down with injury. So I still feel like there's talent and there's playmakers on that Rams team. I do feel like the run game needs to be a bit better to loosen up Stafford a little bit more. I think maybe he's throwing a little too often and maybe trying to force things, like when he was in Detroit. I feel like maybe he's come with a bit of that mindset that he's the only good player on the team when
I think it's a little bit of what Rob said, though. I think they're lacking that kind of dynamic runner. Like we've seen good things from Sonny Michel. We've seen good things from, is it Darrell Henderson that they've
Henderson's
got?
All, and I mean, they're good running backs, aren't they? But
they've just not got it going. That's my point. I just feel like they've not, hit the level that you'd want them to.
Particularly in that, I mean, the schemes that are put together, in Los Angeles, and, McVay is so good at these. You often think of them as being creative, kind of run-friendly schemes. It does seem odd because you make a really good point there. I mean, about there almost being a feel of, previous Lions teams about, Matt Stafford's Rams season thus far. And I mean, that's unforgivable, really, because I know he had Megatron for a period of his career, who's arguably one of the best to ever do it. But this roster is, head and shoulders above anything he had, during his Lions career. And to think there are the same pitfalls, I think is a bit odd. But I mean, you know what, Aldrin, you made a point, and I think you've nailed it. We would feel better about the Rams if they had that marquee win, I think. They beat the Cardinals, maybe even the Packers. I think that whole mindset changes. And maybe this weekend is when that happens. I mean, I'd love to see the Cardinals do it. I think it is a coin flip game between two very good teams, as I've said. But do you know what? I think that's all they're missing. I think when the best have rolled into town, the Rams haven't quite been at their best. But I said this about the Ravens a few weeks ago. October, November, December isn't when you need to do it. January, and potentially for either of these teams, early February could very well be.
Like you you have to look at this and think that this is going to be a game that you could potentially see at some point in the playoffs. Like you got to look at this and think both teams are going to get there. Both teams are going to be dangerous. Let's see what happens when maybe the roads circle back to each other again. Also think it's interesting to look at the Cardinals as undefeated at 7-0 on the road, but I think is it 3-2 at home. This being at home, are they gonna do anything to shake that kind of thing? And granted, like one of those losses does come kind of with Murray and no Hopkins, like we talked about, but it's still something to keep in mind. Whereas the Rams would come into State Farm
Stadium nowadays.
State Farm Stadium, and see if they can kind of dominate. I think it's just assert dominance. And to go back to kind of what we were talking about there, one of the big things to do to assert dominance in a team is run the football, run it down their throats. And are we actually going to see that from the Rams, as we said, or is Matt Stafford just can't get out of that, like Brett Favre, Max, throw the ball, do wacky things while throwing it?
Two quick things, and they are quick for me. The Cardinals thing about them being better on the road than at home is obviously factual. I mean, you're absolutely right with the records you've just... But I mean, I don't think it's a huge thing. I mean, they're still above 500 at home. On the road, I mean, I think in the history of the NFL, teams who've had perfect seasons on the road, I don't know if there's been more, but famously, was it the 84 49ers who didn't lose a game on the road all season in their Super Bowl? Yeah, I might be mixed up. But I mean, it takes a very special team to have that kind of year on the road. You know, the losses at home, I mean, the Panthers was a real off day. The Packers, I just thought, was a bit like this game this weekend. Two very good teams separated by not an awful lot. But yeah, I think it's a coin flip. I don't think the Rams are out of it at all. They're too talented to be out of any game, really. All that's left, JB, is to decide who you're putting in Club Dub. We can already see the Kansas City Chiefs making merry and partying in there. Talk us through who's going to join them and why.
Well, best in the West night is going to be red themed because we are welcoming the Arizona Cardinals into Club Dub for it.
Don't look now, but I think we've got the Cardinals in Club Dub for 2 consecutive weeks. Having not been mentioned as a game of the week before this point, we're on a bit of a roll now with the Arizona Cardinals. I would love them to be. It is a rare thing as a Cardinals fan to sit atop the NFL. And I would just love this to be a special year. I think there are the players there to make it a special year, as much as I think it only takes one good team on any given Sunday. In fact, Steve Keim, I remember when we lost the NFC Championship game in 2015 to the Panthers, and they talked about the flight home, and Steve Keim, the GM of the Cardinals, I should mention, if people aren't as into the Arizona Cardinals as I am, said on the way home it struck him on the plane that it's just the NFL. You know, in any given season in the NFL, there's one winner and 31 losers, 31 teams who end up disappointed. But my God, what a year of progress from Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray, et al. Yeah, super year. So I have loved your picks, and I do think it is a week that provides some real blockbuster games, but I genuinely think the game of the week is still on the table. Aldrin, you talked about the losing team from last year's Super Bowl. Well, I'm going to throw ourselves straight at the reigning Super Bowl champions. I'm going to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Buffalo Bills. Now, the Bills are a weird one, and I want to kind of just wipe something from their slate already, really, which is the game they had against the Patriots last week. I think is a game that is really hard to take anything from. In those conditions, you are ultimately left with very few options when it comes to passing the football. And when your best run threat is a quarterback that loves to effectively run when he has a broken play, I think it was more of a limiting factor for the Bills than the Patriots. That said, if the Chiefs are up and down and the Rams are up and down, well, what are the Bills? Because the Bills, I think, are different to the Chiefs and the Rams in that they are genuinely disappointing. They are a team that has not impressed offensively, and a team last year that you felt kind of was able to perform at a high level, was able to bring those complementary players to a level where it felt like the whole offensive unit was better than the sum of its parts, has now been replaced by a unit where you do look at the star quality they have. So you look at, obviously, Josh Allen and maybe Diggs, I suppose, is the other one you jump to. And you look at that start and think, well, even they're not hitting the heights. And we've talked about expectation levels in the two games so far. Expectation levels are huge if you're at the Kansas City Chiefs. They're huge if you're at the Los Angeles Rams. They're huge if you're Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, right? They are enormous. And this is a team that just hasn't quite had it on offense. And then you look at the defense and you think, well, that hasn't quite been at the level you would expect either. And look, I still think the Bills will be playing meaningful football in late December, definitely. In early January, very probably. But do you know what? I don't think you'd be afraid of them, would you? I don't think if you were facing the Buffalo Bills that they have the swagger, the confidence, that vertical ability, you know, to create big plays and really send that ball flying. They just don't have it. And then you've got the Tampa Bay. I was about to talk Tom Brady, so thinking the Patriots again. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who not only have a quarterback who defies time, but a team that sort of defies logic in a way. Because you have got a team that is a mix of superstars and ultimately big names who, you know, on the one hand, you look at Leonard Fournette and you go, well, you know, playoff Lenny, Leonard Fournette has been a talented footballer in the NFL for a number of years, done great things. But equally, without the Buccaneers, he's a player who, for my money, could just as easily be out of the league altogether. He could be in an Adrian Peterson style situation where he's been bought in by teams when injuries occur and so on. So you look at the Buccaneers and go, well, obviously people had high hopes for them. They're the defending champs and everything that goes with that. But ultimately, what's going on there that is so magical for me beyond the Brady show is just great coaching. You know, the fact that in Todd Bowles, they have somebody who is just a defensive genius, particularly stopping things like the run. You have, you know, I was going to say Leftwich as an offensive coordinator who's really earning his stripes, but you do wonder how much of that offensive playbook and those ideas come from Bruce Arians. But anyway, regardless, the Buccaneers, I think, are really well coached, high on talent, will be there or thereabouts. However, for everything I've just said, disappointing Bills team, exceptionally talented Bucs team, I do think there's a little bit of how these puzzle pieces come together this weekend that make it a little bit closer. I mentioned in the Patriots game that the Bills become very limited when you take away the passing game and you leave them with the run. Well, the Buccaneers arguably are really good at doing the opposite. They're really good at taking away the run, but will probably leave you opportunities with that secondary in the passing game. And I just think that's a good fit for the Bills. And if the defense, if they are really genuinely going to think of themselves as Super Bowl contenders, that defense has got to get back in the habit of stopping big offenses. By the time you get to January, you're going to be up against big offenses in every round of those playoffs as far as you possibly get. So ultimately for me, I see a route where this could come right for the Bills. But if it doesn't, I mean, we were talking about the Bills having a mixed season and the Dolphins having a disappointing season a few weeks ago. All of a sudden, the Dolphins were on an amazing win streak out of nowhere. And the Bills could end up really just finding themselves middle of the pack. So I think it's a fascinating game between two teams that are great on paper. Difference is the Bucs have been great on the grass this season. The Bills maybe just need to find their way back and desperately need that win, I think, to get a bit of swagger, a bit of confidence and believe they can go and make something happen late on.
Well, I think the Bucks have had kind of an embarrassment of riches almost in the offensive skill position kind of players, because you've got Gronkowski, you've seen sort of resurgence with Cameron Brate recently. You've got Chris Godwin had a really, really good game at the weekend. Mike Evans is spectacular. Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones have been really good at the times that they've been called on. And the defense has really stood up, and they've continued. I think they've continued to perform at quite a high level. Like, yes, they've had some off plays. Yes, they've had a game or two where they didn't perform well, but you get that with everybody. I think by and large, you would take the Buccaneers defense. Like, if you put that Bucks defense on the Chiefs, we would be talking about the Chiefs very differently to how we've been talking about the Chiefs previously. Yeah. Just using them as the example because we've hit them up already. The Bucks have everything that the Bills don't have, and you wanted, like, Monday night, you wanted the Bills to run more. You wanted the Bills to run Josh Allen more, and they just didn't do it. And outside of Stephon Diggs, who have the Bills really got on offense that you would look at and think, like, the conversation, like when we were at school, going back years and years now, was always when you were talking about football teams, it's like, oh, who would you pick from one team? Who would you take from Manchester United and put on your team? Who would you take from Arsenal? Who would you take from Chelsea? Whoever the big successful team at the time was, if you were going to take one player from them, who would it be? If you were going to take a player off that Bills offense and you can't have Josh Allen or Stephon Diggs, who are you taking?
You're making quite a lot of rules to this, but I can't take Josh Allen or Stephon. Yeah, no, I think you're right. But last season, who have they lost since last season? And they brought it all together then. I mean, they fell a little short, but they were exciting. They were dynamic. They were a vertical offense. They moved the ball in chunks. I mean,
but that was driven off. But that was driven off the back of what we talked about, like, at the start of when we started making this podcast, off a Josh Allen performance that was historically relevant, because you had never seen a quarterback make the kind of jump that he made from one season to another. It was powered by that, and that quarterback performance has not existed this year. I'm not saying Josh Allen isn't as good as that was. I'm not saying that was a fluke or a mirage or anything like that. It's just categorically, factually speaking, how well he played last season does not match how well he is playing this season. And that is an incredible reason why. Like, you look at, like, Brady's not been spectacular. Brady's not been lights out. He's had bad games. He's thrown interceptions that you wouldn't want him to throw. What's the announcer say? Oh, he'd like that one back. There's been a lot of those. But because it doesn't just have to be Brady motivating everything, Brady moving everything, the Bucks have got a bit of an advantage there. I think you're kind of right to also kind of call out the defense of the Bills a little bit. It's not kind of been that Sean McDermott spectacular that you kind of expect. We've seen it going back to his days at the Panthers. He's got amazing things out of, I don't want to say bang average players, because I think that's doing them all a disservice, but he's got your average grade player to play exactly as to the level that they need to in the games that they've really needed that high performance from. And they've just not seen that this year.
Weird one. Brady, I think, yes, he's had picks this year. I mean, he had some against, what was it, the Falcons at the weekend. I mean, but Brady's throwing the ball a lot. I mean, I think when you look at the MVP conversation, I think Brady, in my mind, is quite a way ahead of everybody else. I mean, you're right. Josh Allen hasn't had the season that we thought he'd have after last year, but then neither's Herbert, neither's Lamar Jackson, neither's, he's not alone, neither's Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I still think, in fact, you said it, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I still think Josh Allen is a great quarterback. But yeah, I don't know what it's been about quarterback play this year. It's not quite had those. Like I say, Derek Carr has probably been one of the most impressive, probably top 5 this year. Feels a weird year for quarterbacks, I suppose, is all I'm saying. And yeah, the no-name thing about the offense, I agree with you, but it's nothing new, and they found a way last year and to an extent the year before. It feels like there could be a win or maybe a couple of wins in truth from being back on track.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of your points, really. I think, I don't know, both teams, with Tampa Bay, I feel like they're beatable each week. And that's not a bad thing because they do keep winning. But I do feel like if you can press home an advantage, you can win. I think the Colts didn't do that against the Bucs team that was inherently beatable that day. We went away from the run and played into their hands, and that was frustrating. The Bills, again, weird. I think their complete lack of run game is murdering their chances of being able to make a really deep run in the playoffs. I think Allen has been disappointing, but only because I think he's gone away from being a dual threat quarterback, really. He's just gone on his arm talent, and that's, I don't know, okay. He's got a hell of an arm. But I felt where he really excelled was bringing in the option of the run and keeping defenses honest. But, I think with Singletary and Moss at running back, neither of them have put together anything this year. And with Allen not offering that other threat, it's made them predictable. And all you have to do is cover Diggs at the minute, and it's an easy win.
You mentioned not having a high profile, but they must have expected more out of Singletary, right? Must have. I mean, surely he's one of those names that you'd think they should be getting more. But the chat around the NFL for the last 5, 6, 7 years is just how important are attributes at running back. How much is it about scheme? And we've seen outside those really big names how undervalued ultimately running backs have been within NFL rosters and NFL systems. Look, it comes to me, and I think regular listeners will know that when we do our pick'ems each week to see who we're putting in Club Dub, we also pick the winners from every game. And there are weeks when I kind of go with what I think, and there are weeks when I look at your picks and think, well, I might mix it up a bit. I can see that one going the other way and so on. And maybe in this case, I'm thinking the latter. But there are two factors that go into my decision as to who to put in Club Dub. One is I think the Bills just need it more. I think the Bills will be smarting. Ultimately, they went to Bill Belichick's house and ended up having to play a game in Bill Belichick conditions that played into the hands of Bill Belichick. I think they were beaten in a, as dull as it might sound, a low-scoring game like that. That's Bill Belichick's idea of heaven, right? I mean, that's him playing, the kind of football that he wishes was still around. It's like going back 30 years. I think the Bills want it more. I think the Bills need it more. And I think when it comes to player for player, with the exception of probably quarterback, you're playing against Tom Brady, and with the exception of possibly the Bucs D-line, I think keeping that D-line in check with Jason Pierre-Paul, with also those linebackers, to be fair, if they can protect Josh Allen, I think you're right, Aldrin. I think the Bucs are beatable. So in a real, shock prediction, the third and final team I'm putting into Club Dub this week is the Buffalo Bills.
I feel like we missed Bills, what would have been irreverent input there when you picked against the Bucs. I feel like there would have been.
Yeah, I feel like I also wanted him to mention players that the average NFL fan has never heard of. This had long snapper written all over it, right? I mean, somebody obscure was going to get a mention. And in case the long snapper of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers listens, please don't feel offended by my comments. I have no chance of ever being a professional athlete of any kind. But yeah, I think the Buffalo Bills need it a little more. And I've gone for, follow all of our picks on social, everybody. And you'll probably see that I've done that quite a lot this week, just gone for the team who needs it that little bit more rather than the team who maybe have that bit of momentum. And I could look very foolish, but hopefully it makes for a really exciting group of games. So off the back of an interesting week last week, we head into an interesting slate of games this week. I cannot wait. And remember, all of you out in listener land, we now have 2 shows a week. So join us next Tuesday when we recap all of the NFL's games, and join us again in a week's time for another great Pick'em show. Gentlemen, I think your input this week has been stellar. I feel it's another example of gold standard podcastmanship.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah,
let's go with
why
that.
not?
If it's not a word, it is now. So yeah, let's get together in a few days and do it all again. But yeah, thanks for your input. Amazing stuff. Have a good week, all.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game is over. The game is over.
It'd be helpful if we record early this week. I've got a McDonald's coming in a minute. Are you Phil? Are you like disguised? Anyway,
Make a
I'll be quiet.
sandwich.
Right, I'm going to be quiet.